Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Matthews, and today I'm going to talk about salaries and payroll within Major League Baseball over the past 10 years. I have always been very interested in baseball, and growing up as a kid, it was one of my favorite pastimes. So as I got into data science and looking into projects with data using statistics, it felt like a natural place to do some analysis in. So I am going to share an app that I built using Shiny, and I'm going to walk through some of the different pieces of analysis that I came up with. But to start out, I'm going to share my data sources and explain how I got them. So to get my team salary data, I referenced this website, spotrack.com. And what's really neat about this site is that they save their data by year and by team payroll, and they break it out by position. So if you're curious how much the Dodgers spent on a catcher or in their pitching alone, it's all stored in that format. And they also have the total payroll there. So that was a very good starting point to figure out how much teams have been spending for the past 10 years in baseball. And from there, I did some analysis on what that looked like and what that trended like over the years. So I was able to export that data from the website, and I added some fields and some more derived columns to better further the analysis later on for the app. So the data was pretty clean when I got it, but I added some fields for the league that each team played in that wasn't originally in the data set, so National League or American League. The win rate was also only stored as a percentage, so I derived the total number of wins and losses by timesing the win percentage by 162, or doing one minus the win percentage and timesing that by 162 to get the loss. Another thing that wasn't within the data set, but I thought would be interesting, was I added average player salary. I ultimately did not include that in my analysis, but I also was able to add playoff data. So this wasn't in the data set, and I added this from baseballreference.com. They had a very clean way of tracking the past decade's worth of postseason data. So what was really neat in going through all this data and digging through it was 2021 was a big outlier because of COVID, and it was a shortened season. So the win ratio had to be adjusted for 60 games, and the playoffs for that year included 16 teams, which is quite large. So I'm sorry, 2020, that was the year that it had the the shortened season, but the expanded playoff roster. It's very sizable. So I had to adjust for that in my data. But combining those features together, I was able to come up with a really interesting scatter plot. So instead of having 30 different colors for each team, I decided to keep my teams by league. And using Plotly, I'm able to hover over a data point and kind of indicate what team that is. And what was neat about this, or fun about this exercise, is I added in, did that team make it to the World Series? Another feature I built into this plot was I let the size of the dot indicate whether or not the team made the postseason that year. So the size of the dot really matters here. And what's neat is that the users can pick the X and the Y axis on things that they're interested in. So right now I have it on total salary, but let's see, pitching seems to have a very strong correlation. The more you spend on pitching, looks like those teams are winning more. Let's look at outfield. Outfield's a little different. There are some teams that don't spend that much on the outfield, but still win. So maybe they have a young farm system or some up and coming players like the Astros did. So this comparison plot is one of my more static plots, in the sense that I don't animate it through the years with the frame using Plotly, using that feature. But I still feel like it provides a lot of drill down and exploratory analysis for MLB payroll data, which is a lot of fun. So the next graphic that I'd like to get into is the team payroll data. So this bar chart, stacked bar chart, or this bar chart is showing what are each team's payroll commitments for the year. And we're using the same color scheme for AL and NL as we were using in our previous plot. But what's neat about this is I added in a frame function for the years. So if we hit play, you can see how team spending has changed over the past couple of years. So in 2013, it was kind of the end of the Yankees' biggest spending era. And as we get into 2016, 2017, we see that, you know, the Yankees didn't win a World Series in a long time, and other teams kind of hop on going big and spending. So the Dodgers take up a lot of salary space there. The Cubs came off of a World Series and invested more and more money into payroll. It's a really neat to watch these trends develop over time. So that's kind of one of the more fun interactive features. So my next plot, I decided to explore a team's postseason factors, whether or not they make it or not. And I also broke that out by American League and NL League, and postseason, no postseason. So when I was doing that, feature creation earlier in Excel, that is what helps separate those teams who make it into the postseason and who don't. So where does the spending make you more competitive? That's what this analysis is kind of showing. So if we look at total salary, hit play, we can kind of see that really the bigger spenders tend to make the postseason. That's not a very big surprise. But if we're curious to see how pitching stands out, we can kind of see how that trend is. If you pay for pitching, you probably are going to make the playoffs. So that's what this analysis does. And what I really appreciate about it, I wanted to show the range within the salary data by the American League and National League. And the box plot does a great job of showing that relationship. So showing that interquartile range and those standard deviations from that. So I felt that relationship was really interesting to visualize. Now, the next tab is going to need a little more explanation. So I had a hard time looking for top paid players by year for the past 10 years. Because on most sport websites, they share the highest paid player for that year in the American League and in the National League. But that's not enough data points for 10 years to make a really insightful plot. So what I did was I found this website called Steve the Ump, and he keeps tables worth of data throughout the years. And basically what I did was I copied each table, put it into Excel, transformed the data, and I made it into something that could be used. So let me pull that up real quick. And what was neat about this exercise was it required some data prep work and data cleaning as the previous data set. So bringing over the league so I can do that comparative analysis. And I also had to come up with a way of showing the player positions, because each table had a different way of saying third base. It could be 3B, third baseman, things of that nature. So it was great for the salary information. But what I wanted to explore was I wanted to see if a player had a higher salary, what was their wins above replacement? And I know within the baseball statisticians community, there's kind of a big debate of how good WAR is as a success metric. But when it comes down to looking at your highest paid player, I think it's a really good indicator for how well they are performing above somebody else that you have. So I am going to show how that plot looks like. So in the salary WAR tab, we have the same color scheme as we did in the previous plots, except the postseason box, American League and National League. And what's neat about this is when you hover over the point, you're looking at individual players. So these are the top 10 players in all of baseball and how much they made. And I also added in the position that they play. So what's neat about this is you can hit play and use that frame function within plotly. You can kind of see how those trends evolve. So let's look at 2022, this most recent. Who's our most expensive contract? Starting pitcher, Max Scherzer. Okay. What's our next highest pitch or highest salary? Garrett Cole with the Yankees. Yeah, also a pitcher, very expensive. So what's interesting is that our players with high WAR for this past year were not pitchers, but the salaries were pitchers. So another thing that was really neat about this plot was that certain players just really stand out using this comparative when you're comparing WAR to salary. And Mike Trout clearly stands out in baseball. And this graphic really shows that, okay, so you're making a big salary commitment to one player, but that player is bringing in almost 10 WAR in a single season. So he kind of broke that narrative of a young star comes up, plays really well and produces, and then signs a big contract and then struggles to ultimately live up that contract. So that's one of the phenomenon in baseball that people don't appreciate. So yeah. So another thing about this analysis is I kind of provided a lot of detail in how I came about finding this data and how I cleaned it, formatted it, and kind of found interesting trends. I always knew that pitching is one of the more heavy spend areas within baseball, and especially a team's payroll. But these charts and these visualizations really amplify that narrative, which I found really interesting. So some thoughts on some further analysis, like next steps of what might be interesting. It would be cool to see, 20 years worth of data and see how those trends have changed over time. And it could be really interesting to add in features like the player's age when they sign those contracts for the salary WAR. And it could also be really interesting to break this out even further and say, did they make it to the American League or did they make it to the Championship League Series, or did they make it to the World Series within the postseason analysis? But yeah, this has been a really fun exercise and a really interesting way to visualize baseball data using the principles that we learned in this class. So thank you for listening to my presentation.